Hello, fifth graders, and welcome to your language arts lesson for today. For today, you will need your poetry book, your language arts materials or binder. Again, I say a dictionary with a star because either you're going to use a physical dictionary or you will use an online dictionary. And then again, paper and pencil. If that's something that you've been utilizing, then something to continue to do. So for today, after we're going to talk a little bit about our woman work questions, and we'll do that first, and then we'll get into our objectives. So I'm going to flip you around and just go over these woman work questions quickly here. So we're still working on, remember, what is the poem title? There's two things that I'm looking, well, three things, I guess. Technically, I am, first of all, always looking for you to restate the question in your answer. So the poem title is... Remember, we're working on having our poem titles in quotation marks. That's how we show that it is a poem title. So we want to have quotation marks around it. And then capitalization, right? In this case, with the exception of Emily Dickinson, and then we actually have one later poem that is going to have different capitalization because it's actually technically not a poem. But all other poems, you want to make sure you're capitalizing that first and last word as well as all important words, okay? So we want to make sure that we're capitalizing woman work, okay? Poem's author, we would say, again, the poem's author is Maya Angelou. We had two rhyme schemes in this poem. So our first rhyme scheme, if we're following our rule, which I tell you that the number of letters in a stanza, that's how many, sorry, the number of lines in a stanza, that's how many letters should be in your rhyme scheme. So if we're looking at that first rhyme scheme, we'd say the poem's first rhyme scheme is A, A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, E, F, F, G, G. Okay, so in other words, every two lines rhyme. The poem's second rhyme scheme is going to be the ones that we have for the last four stanzas. And so for each of those, we have A, B, C, B. Okay, A, B, C, B. Number 5 asks, what does the first stanza of the poem address? We'd say the first stanza of the poem addresses how much the woman dislikes her life. No, excuse me, that's wrong. All of the things that the woman has to do. That is the correct answer. The first stanza of the poem addresses all of the things that the woman must do. Number 6, the last four stanzas address the rest that the woman desires, right? She's really calling out for a break, for some peace, for some rest. What is one quote in this poem that shows personification? So again, we're restating the question. One quote in this poem that shows personification is a lot of these things at the end, right, would be personification because she's talking to these inanimate, natural things, things in nature, as if they are in control. So a lot of you had cover me with white, cold, icy kisses, right? Snowflakes don't kiss, and that's a really great, clear example. But other ones too, right? If we're saying star shine, she's talking to the stars as if they are somehow able to choose to shine or not shine, which it would be human, right? Human to have the choice to do or not do something. Or storm, blow me from here, as if the storm could choose to blow her. So all of those would be great examples of personification. So remember, we're still working on this explanation. So this quote is an example of personification because, remember how we set it up? You'd say, for instance, the non-human snowflakes are giving her human kisses. All right. 9A. So we have this question of who does Angelou seem to be defending in this poem? So the answer, Angelou seems to be defending blank in this poem. A lot of you said women, which definitely is a possible answer, right? She's talking a lot about women and all of the work that they need to do, okay? There are some clues, though, about what she might be talking about, some clues. And some of you kind of cued in on this. In the first stanza, she references picking, that she had cotton to pick, right? That she had cotton to pick. And so think about what you learned in fourth grade and what's going to be true for groups who are picking cotton. If you think about our country's history, who were those who were picking cotton? These are typically going to be enslaved peoples, people who were enslaved. And so there seems to be this defense of women, yes. Black women, yes, absolutely. Enslaved people, enslaved women. All of those things absolutely seem to be true, right? There's this defense. And so, depending on what you answered for 9A, your answer for 9B will be different. But again, restating the question, Angela seems to think that this group is undervalued or underrepresented because lots of things, right? Working to, if you just said women, right, there's definitely a representation of women and all of the work that they need to do. Okay. If you were talking about enslaved people, you'd be talking about perhaps all of the things that this woman is doing for her enslaver. Okay. Um, but not for herself, not for her own life, right? She's got this list of things that she's doing. And of course, we know that the inhumanity of slavery, right? So something along those lines as well. Okay, rhyme scheme got a little tricky, but how does this rhyme scheme match what is being described in these first 14 lines? Almost the way you say the rhyme scheme, right? A, B, B, C, C, D, D, right? And there's just, it's a list, right? That first rhyme scheme is really kind of driving this list of things she has to do, one thing after another, and there's not enough time, right, to even really stop and look at that rhyme scheme, right? There's no flow to it. Even the length of the lines really gets at this packed, it's a packed rhyme scheme, a packed life. She's busy with no time for rest. And then question 11, the second rhyme scheme in these last lines, it definitely slows down the poem as she's reflecting on and thinking about the way in which she wishes her life would be the peace, the rest that she wishes she could have, right? The rhyme scheme actually slows down the poem as well, and we get more of a rhythmic, peaceful rhyme scheme as she's talking about what she's desiring. So these two were definitely tricky. Some of you did a great job, and some of you were kind of wrestling with it, and that's great too. But we can kind of think about, right, that sometimes poets make choices about rhyme scheme or even length of lines in order to capture what it is that they're describing. Okay, number 12, what is the noun form of this following entry word? We'd look here, right? The N tells us diligence is the noun form. Okay, so you guys did well. There were a lot of tricky questions on this one. There were a lot of tricky questions on this one, but you did a great job handling it. So as we get into today's poem, okay, our objectives here, we're going to be identifying a metaphor, which is why I wanted you to get your language arts materials, because I have that definition of a metaphor. Okay, so a metaphor occurs when one thing is described as being another thing, even though that's not literally true. Okay, the comparison is not literally true. So his words were a symphony of joy. Okay, we're getting a comparison which provides a description, but it's not literally true, right? Or if you said, Miss Bury is a dinosaur, you'd be talking about how old I am, right? Again, I'm not literally a dinosaur, at least not to my knowledge, okay? But this is a comparison you're making to refer to my age, perhaps. Or Miss Bury was a bear, okay? Not literally being a bear, but maybe that my behavior was really kind of gruff and angry and aggressive like a bear. So, one of our questions for today is going to be about metaphor, and we'll talk a little bit about it as we're getting into the poem as well. In addition, we're going to continue selecting quotes to support our answers, and we're going to do that throughout the assignment today. I'm going to ask you to do that repeatedly. So today's poem is called Mother to Son, which the title gives us an indication that this is a mother speaking to her son, okay? It's written by Langston Hughes, who is a famous Black poet. Now, he's no longer alive, but he wrote during a time known as the Harlem Renaissance. And Harlem is a neighborhood in New York City. And at this time in history, there was just a boom of Black artistry. There was a boom of artists and musicians and writers. And by artists, I mean painters, sculptors, everything, right? Playwrights. And so we're seeing like a lot of booming Black art being produced. And so it's kind of known as the Harlem Renaissance because all of these Black artists lived near to one another and in this neighborhood of Harlem, and it became this like booming time of amazing and beautiful and wonderful Black art. So we're going to see, and again, this was like, early 1900s. So Langston Hughes is a well-known poet from this time era. And again, we've kind of talked about how these next poems are written by these Black authors and reflective of their experiences as being Black in America. And we're actually kind of moving backwards. We started with Maya Angelou, who is most recent. She died only recently. Langston Hughes further back, and then our next one by Paul Laurence Dunbar is going to be even further, even closer to the time of slavery. But Langston Hughes is not necessarily writing about slavery. He's writing about his experiences and many people's experiences with racism and trying to navigate the racism in America. So let's take a look at these questions and then we'll get into reading. And again, like we've been doing with poetry, we'll do a little bit of kind of guiding through together so you can kind of work along with me. So these first questions should be pretty not surprising to you, right? What is the poem title? Remember, the poem title is, we want to have a complete sentence. And of course, we want to continue using those quotation marks and capitalizing. You can actually look at the text. That should indicate to you what you do need to capitalize and what you do not, because I've done that in this poetry book. Okay. Who is the poem's author? So the poem's author is, what is the poem's rhyme scheme? Okay, so you kind of have two options, right? The poem's rhyme scheme is blank, or remember that the answer could be there is no rhyme scheme. So 2 multiple choice questions. 4 is asking, what is the mother's advice about? So she's giving her son advice. What is it about? And then 5, which virtue is the mother encouraging her son to use? Number 6, so we see this lead in. The speaker says, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. So the question is, what does the speaker mean by this? What is she saying when she says, life for me ain't been no crystal stair? 7, how has the speaker handled challenges in her life? So this is actually getting at our second objective, the next 2 questions. So the speaker has handled challenges in her life by, and then one quote that shows how she has handled challenges in her life is, and you're going to support your answer with a quote. Okay. The mother in this poem is trying to teach her son a lesson. So 9, what lesson is she trying to teach her son? So we'd say the lesson that she's trying to teach her son is blank. And again, with a quote, what is one quote that shows the lesson she is trying to teach? So one quote that shows the lesson that she's trying to teach is blank. All right. Here's the big question about metaphor. Okay. Hughes, who is our author, uses a metaphor to describe that the speaker has experienced challenges and how she has handled those challenges. So what is the metaphor that Hughes uses? So the metaphor that Hughes uses is blank. Okay, he's comparing something to something else, or he's describing throughout this poem something using this metaphor. And we'll talk a little bit more as we go back through. And then 12, what is one quote that demonstrates this metaphor? Finally, question 13, I'm asking you, this is just I think I actually wrote this poem once upon a time when I was making this assignment. Anyway, what is the rhyme scheme of the following poem? So it's just a random poem, but you're going to practice your rhyme scheme work here, okay? All right, so 5th graders, to get us started, we're going to go ahead and read the poem, which is on page 16 in your poetry book. So I'm going to read through it twice. Mother to Son by Langston Hughes. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor. Bare. But all the time I's been a-climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So, boy, don't you turn back. Don't you set down on the steps 'cause you finds it's kinder hard. Don't you fall now. For I's still going, honey. I's still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Let's read through it one more time. Mother to Son by Langston Hughes. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor. Bare. But all the time I's been a-climbing on, and reaching landings, and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So, boy, don't you turn back. Don't you set down on the steps 'cause you finds it's kinder hard. Don't you fall now. For I's still going, honey. I's still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. All right. So let's flip back around. So I'm going to kind of breeze through the first questions. You've had a chance to work on these, so hopefully you're feeling pretty confident, okay? Remember to restate. Remember your quotation marks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I think you guys should be ready to do on your own. So I would say maybe pause, work on those, and then come on back and we can keep on going. Okay, so the speaker says, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. So we're not kind of literally talking about how her life isn't a staircase, right? That wouldn't be a very interesting statement. That'd be like saying, like, life for me hasn't been a telephone booth, right? This isn't a literal statement. Okay, she's saying something about her life. So what does the speaker mean by this line? I would probably say by this line, the speaker means what? What does she mean when she says that life for me ain't no crystal stair? I'm going to tell you something. This is kind of related to, well, it's very much related to our questions about metaphor. What is she saying? She means that life, what? That her life has been or hasn't been what? Okay, and think about, like, what would a crystal staircase be? Right? If you have a crystal staircase, I mean, that sounds kind of fancy to me, right? Crystal is probably pretty expensive and valuable. And she's saying her life hasn't been that. Her life hasn't been a crystal stair. Okay? So you're going to complete that question. And again, be pausing as we go and kind of work along with me. How has the speaker handled challenges in her life? So the speaker has handled challenges in her life by what? And again, this first part you're going to put in your own words because you're later going to support it with a quote. So she's telling us that she's faced a lot of challenges in her life, a lot of things that have been difficult. But she's also telling her son how she's handled it. So what has been her approach to these challenges in her life? Gotta keep pausing as we go. So 8 then, one quote that shows how she has handled challenges in her life is what? And you're going to pick a quote that really supports your answer here. I'm going to stop telling you to pause, but remember that that's what you should be doing as we're going. So number 9, what lesson is she trying to teach her son? The lesson that she's trying to teach her son is what? What is she telling him? What is she encouraging him to do? What's her point? Again, she's not just saying, like, staircase, tacks and bumps and things, right? What is she telling him? What is her encouragement to him at this point? And we really see towards the end of the poem what she's telling him to do, right? She gets more specific. In fact, she's getting, I mean, there's these commands: don't you, don't you, don't you, right? So she's telling him, what is, if she's saying, don't do this, or think about it the other way, she's saying, do this. If you're not doing one thing, then what are you doing? What is one quote that shows the lesson she is trying to teach? So one, oh boy, we got off and running. One quote that shows the lesson she is trying to teach is, I give you big hints when I was saying don't, right? Those are big hints for quotes there. All right, I've kind of been dancing around and touching on and hitting on this metaphor thing, but what is the metaphor that Hughes uses? So we'll say the metaphor that Hughes uses is comparing blank to blank, or maybe blank not to blank. But really, this is where the metaphor is coming from. He's talking about two things and making this comparison. Blank is like blank, or blank is not like blank. That latter part is kind of a hint there. Blank is not like blank. So as you're setting up this answer, right, he's uses is, that should say not comparison, comparing blank to blank. The metaphor that Hughes uses is comparing blank to blank. And then your quote. Honestly, there's tons of quotes. This whole poem is basically examples of quotes that in that what Hughes is comparing. And again, it's not something that's literally true. It's figurative. He's using this metaphor to describe life. Okay. And then finally, this last poem. So if you've been pausing and working along with me, you should have a pretty good progress on this homework. Okay. Working it through. We'll revisit it when we come back tomorrow and really talk about it. I kind of hinted at, right? I just talked about this being a poem that's really about the experiences of representing some of the challenges with racism and blame and to be Black in America, right? And so this kind of reflection then, like, who is Hughes saying is the crystal stair, right? What is the crystal stair versus this other staircase that he's describing? Okay, so we'll kind of go back over some of these answers tomorrow. We'll kind of dig into those questions, but again, hopefully you're feeling on your way, really set up to go ahead and finish this homework and share your thoughts with me about metaphors. And again, remembering that idea that this metaphor occurs when one thing is described as being another thing, or maybe not being another thing, um, even though it's not literally true, right? So you're kind of making a statement about something using this figurative language. All right. As always, if you have questions, let me know. You know, I'm always looking forward to seeing your work. Good luck.